Hi everyone, how are you doing today? I'm going to be reading to you an essay I wrote back in my college days for an American literature course. It was really the only literature course I took because I was a STEM major, but I enjoyed it a lot. I had a wonderful professor, and we read several novels for that class. This essay is about The Prairie by James Fenimore Cooper, and another lesser-known novel called Wieland by Charles Brockden Brown. James Fenimore Cooper, of course, is the author of The Last of the Mohicans, which I think most people have heard of. He lived from the 1780s to 1851 and has been renowned for his Tales of the West. And Charles Brockden Brown is a bit older than him. He was born in 1771, lived to 1810. I'm going to talk about these two books, and my focus for the essay was specifically how violence is portrayed in both these novels and the differences in those portrayals. Unlike the American Gothic, the Western novel is today associated with large-scale violent imagery, such as bloody shootouts between lawmen and outlaws, or isolated settlements destroyed in massacres. James Fenimore Cooper's The Prairie, published in 1827, and Charles Brockden Brown's Wieland, or The Transformation, an American Tale, published in 1798, are two novels that demonstrate this stereotype was essentially reversed in early American literature. Despite its own scenes of bloodshed and violence, The Prairie shows us an imagined, sheltered, sensitive America, one that has been largely tamed of the inner, ambiguous brutality so prevalent in Wieland. Though violence plays an omniscient role in each novel, the storyline of The Prairie could hardly be more dissimilar from that of Wieland. Cooper's novel begins with a classic wagon train scenario, in which the sweet-natured Ellen Wade accompanies a surly pioneer family, the Bushes, into the newly acquired Louisiana Purchase. A chance meeting with an anonymous trapper, Captain Middleton, and a party of hostile Sioux sends the Bushes into a frantic chase across the prairies, ultimately dividing Ellen's loyalty between her adoptive family and her true friends. This is a far cry from the pre-revolutionary setting of Wieland, in which the narrator, Clara Wieland, leads a quiet, studious life near her brother Theodore's estate in Philadelphia. The Wielands are safe from the dangers of actual or allegorical wilderness until some begin to experience frightening hallucinations. Theodore, in spite of his idyllic life, is driven to madness and the dire effects of religious fanaticism. The source of violence is indeed a defining difference between the two novels. The heroes of The Prairie face assault only from the forces of the lawless frontier. The protagonists of Wieland must face evil stemming from within their sphere of civilized, cultured life and their own troubled psyches. Cooper's upper-class heroine, Inés de Sertovallos, is kidnapped by both a Sioux tribe who are outside the law and by the borderer Abiram, who considers himself outside the law. In contrast, Brown's character, Theodore Wieland, leads a life that is the epitome of respectability, education, and lawfulness, yet he becomes, it seems, possessed by demons. This reaches a point at which it is believed the, quote, soul that formerly actuated his frame has disappeared. While the character of Carwin, a mysterious stranger, creates an impression of an outward enemy, the real nemesis in Wieland originates physically in Theodore himself. Brown's descriptions gravitate towards explicit gore, whereas Cooper describes comparable brutalities with nearly bloodless elegance. Of Theodore's suicide, Brown writes, in Clara's voice, quote, he plunged it to the hilt in his neck, and his life instantly escaped with the stream that gushed from the wound. My hands were sprinkled with his blood as he fell. Cooper's dueling scene between the Sioux Matory and Pawnee Hardheart is mild by comparison. The keen weapon whirled a few times in the air, and its point meeting the naked breast of the impetuous Sioux, the blade was buried to the buckhorn haft. Maury laid his hand on the weapon, and seemed to hesitate whether to withdraw it or not. For a moment his countenance darkened with the most inextinguishable hatred and ferocity, and then he staggered to the edge of the sands, and halted with his feet in the water. Repeatedly Cooper strives to depersonalize violence, while Brown ever strives for the opposite. Brown goes so far as to allow his vulnerable, feminine characters to die, a concept unthinkable in Cooper's The Prairie, in which death reaches only the brave, masculine few. In apprehension of a buffalo stampede, Cooper's two heroines are placed in the edge of the thicket on the side farthest from the approaching herd, upon which figurative pedestal they safely remain for the rest of the novel. Wieland goes to the opposite extreme, leaving Clara Wieland as the only female survivor of a string of hideous crimes. The rest of the female characters are sensationally placed, quote, beyond the reach of injury, for they are dead. A more intricate interpretation would even discount Clara as a survivor, as her personality is masculine for the time period and lacks the angelic attributes her sister-in-law Catherine and adopted niece Louisa possess. The critical point of each novel is the quintessential American demand for justice, the punishment of evildoers. Yet even here, Brown and Cooper's novels take different approaches. In The Prairie, one villain is told, quote, "Thou hast done murder, and for the same must thou die." Cooper defines his villains and their fates very clearly. By contrast, Brown allows his readers to form their own conclusions about the stranger Carwin's eccentric, ambiguous deeds. As for Theodore Wieland, his sister does not hope for his punishment, only for his release. "Oh, that thy frenzy had never been cured, that thy madness with its blissful visions would return. Or if that must not be, that thy scene would hasten to a close, that death would cover thee with his oblivion." Like the imagery suggested by its title, The Prairie is a novel in which danger and death are diffused, yet also muted within a concrete storyline of good guys versus bad guys. Its scenes of violence are characterized by reserve and sensitivity, unlike Wieland's acts of bloodshed, which are highly concentrated and explicit. The inner demons in Brown's novel leave no one unaffected. Cooper, for his part, allows his characters to distance themselves from such vague horrors that they might find poetic justice and the promise of happiness on the wild frontier. Alright, so I ran out of space on my camera, but as just sort of a summary, that was my essay, rather wordy as well as how I wrote back then. But yeah, I think the two novels were interesting from a historical and literary standpoint. I wouldn't say that I enjoyed either of them that much. Cooper's style is very wordy, as is common of American authors from before the 20th century. Don't ask me why, I don't know. It's just something I've noticed. And Brockden Brown's far more readable, but his novel was just very sensational, and it didn't really have the kind of depth I like in a work of Gothic literature. I can hear my neighbors making a lot of noise right now, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed this nonetheless. Let me know if you've read The Last of the Mohicans or anything by Cooper, or Brown for that matter. Maybe he's being rediscovered in recent years. I am not sure, but nevertheless, I am glad I had a chance to read these novels and just really broaden my landscape of reading a little bit. So thanks for watching. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you soon.